Hello, book lovers. Welcome to Authors Love Bookstores with a Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Joe Moldover, author of the novel Every Moment After, and I am so happy to be here with you today. Authors Love Bookstores is a weekly online program held every Wednesday. Our mission is to highlight independent bookstores across the United States and Canada, to tell you what makes them so special, and to talk about what you can do to support them. Our producer today is my partner and fellow writer, Kimberly Hensel-Lawrence. And if you are watching live with us on Facebook or YouTube, please feel free to post a question. If you do, you will become eligible for a free giveaway of Melissa's new novel, The Hive. So without, there it is. And there it is. There's the
Ready.
Visual. There it is.
Just happen to have one laying around.
Without further ado, let me introduce our guest. I'm so delighted today to be joined by author Melissa Scholes Young and Melissa novels The Hive and Flood, and editor of Grace and Darkness and Furious Gravity, two anthologies of new writing by DC women writers. She is a contributing editor at Fiction Writers Review, and her work has appeared in The Atlantic, Washington Post, Poets and Writers, Plowshares, Literary Hub, and elsewhere. She's also has been the recipient of fellowships from Breadloaf and the Center for Mark Twain Studies. Born and raised in Hannibal, Missouri, she is currently an associate professor of literature at American University. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're delighted to have you here. And with us is Melissa's favorite independent bookseller, Hannah Oliver Depp of Loyalty Books in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Hannah. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, I'm very excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Hannah, you were recently featured in the Los Angeles Review of Books, which did a great write-up on you and your path to book selling, and we're going to put a link to it in the chat so that the audience can check it out. You had a wonderful quote in that interview. It's one of my favorite. This is our 68th show, interviewing authors and booksellers. We've spoken to a lot of booksellers, and this is one of my favorite quotes. Bookselling is the combination of everything I've ever loved, which is a great line. And I would love for you to elaborate on it. But also, before you do, I just want to note that it is not the first thing that you did, that you came to bookselling by by like a circuitous route. And I have to say, there are some jobs that I feel like I'd kind of like to do them just to be able to say that it's my job. And being a medievalist is probably high on that list. So anyway, tell us about yourself, your background, your path to doing this.
Sure. So like many lower class kids, brown people, I think I started working at like 10, doing odd jobs, saving up. I really very much so wanted to go to college. Don't worry, I'm still a millennial. I still ended up with an unconscionable amount of student debt, despite having started saving for college when I was 10. But yeah, I mean, they're not remotely even all in that interview. I mean, I worked on farms. I did just anything you can think of. My mother had a children's entertainment business. She's a professional storyteller, a balloon artist. I learned. We have circus folk background. Like that, my bio is a delight of inconsistency, but one of the things that absolutely I always knew is that I was going to be involved with books. And despite having worked adjacent to books, I worked at a used bookstore as a teenager and in college. I volunteered at the library. I did all those sorts of things. And yet no one ever made it clear that bookselling was a career, that was a thing you could do with your life, not just like an odd job to have. I worked retail as soon as before it was really legal to do so. I think my first retail job was 14, not 16, which I think it was supposed to be 16. Very tall. People just didn't ask a lot of questions. It was the 90s. But I definitely, and I loved retail. I love working with people and helping them figure things out. And it is a skill and it is a talent to be able to deal with the public, and also to help crazed, panicked people looking for a gift find the right thing that makes them feel good when they leave the store. And then if you add bookselling into that, there's a lot of emotional labor. I mean, it's like a full-on Catholic confessional in a bookstore half the time. I mean, people tell you things that you would just not tell your closest friend. It is insane. So I was also a theater kid. I did construction. I just loved working with my hands. I loved doing things, loved being out there. But I always felt the call of academia. I loved medieval studies. I loved modernism. I loved teaching and working directly in the community, which is sometimes possible in academia, as Melissa well knows, and sometimes it is you're kind of removed community, depending on the university. Happily, American University, where I went to grad school and Melissa teaches, is more engaged in the community than some other places. But no, whenever I would focus on kind of one of these things I did, it was always at the detriment or even to the disparity of the other thing I was doing. I became really involved in academia. No one's like, oh, really? Tell me what's interesting happening in your retail job that you're doing to support your work. And when you're in, retail, people tend to be like, why are you doing that again? Like, what's happening? Do people even read books? There's just always a tension. When I came into bookselling, I was pretty burnt out and pretty frustrated with academia. I was not an African American literature scholar, which is even in bookselling what everyone assumes you are if you say that you were an academic before bookselling. They're like, oh, you study African American literature because you're Black. And I'm like, no, I studied dragons. And it is, so, but that's like where, say, for instance, the funding is if you're a scholar of my hue. And so I was pretty frustrated. And I'd grown up going to Politics and Prose here in Washington and DC, the venerable, venerated, much loved bookstore here. And I walked in and asked, I was like, I'm taking a break from academia, and I was working on my PhD, and I wanted to take a break, and I would love a job. And as someone who now hires and works in bookstores, I can tell you that when an academic comes in or somebody says they're working on their advanced degree and they're like, I want to work in a bookstore, it's like red flag, because there is the vision of somebody like sitting there reading Proust and mulling over a macaroon and like doing the opposite of what bookselling is, which is first and foremost retail. It's boxes and boxes of books. It's hauling things. It's dealing with customer service. While also simultaneously being able to need to talk about Proust sometimes. Like it is all the sides. But once I explained that I've been working for pretty much my entire life in frontline kind of careers, I was welcomed into the bookselling fold. And that was a great place to learn the trade because, like I said, it's such a staple of the bookselling industry for these last almost 40 years now, maybe even more. The store turned 35 while I was there. I remember that. So I learned a lot, but it was also, it could be really hard and disheartening. It's an extremely, extremely wealthy area of Washington, D.C. It's one of the richest neighborhoods in the country, and which is a great place for an indie bookstore to thrive, but also comes with a, like, white privilege doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of what it's like there. Just complete blindness almost to everything going on. And it would really wear you down. I was very good at my job. I had wonderful managers. I was really supported at that store. I know, it was a place where I learned my trade and they helped me in my career, but it was so exhausting. And not to mention, it wasn't my part of DC. I live in Petworth and now in Brightwood, actually, down along Georgia Avenue on the other side of the tracks, DC, which of course is now completely gentrified. But there's still my community there, and they weren't being served. And also, not to mention that as I got further in and further engaged in the publishing side of bookselling, talking directly with publishers, hosting events, really championing authors I loved, the things people would say to you to your face, you were like, if you're saying this to my face, what are you saying in the rooms when I'm not here? If you are telling me, a person with a master's degree, that Black people don't read books, like, to my face, what on earth are you saying when I'm not around? And it doesn't matter the data. Black women buy the most books in the US. and have for a generation. That data didn't matter. That was just the prevailing thing. So when I decided that bookselling had my whole heart, because I got to be a theater kid, I got to be a retail expert, I got to be the biggest of book nerds, I got to really discover books and make sure that they got in the hands of readers, regardless of whether the publishing machine necessarily cared about that book or not. That connection was just unlike anything. We were totally engaged in our community, but I also knew there was a community that needed me much more than this very affluent community did. And so I basically made it my mission to learn every single aspect about the book industry so that I could build the strongest store that no one could dismiss. And started that project in like 2015. And we opened Loyalty as a pop-up in 2018. And now we have 2 locations.
That's fabulous. That's great. Thank you for all of that. And now Melissa and I are going to collaborate in embarrassing you because in just a moment, I'm going to ask her to talk about what she loves so much about Loyalty.
Oh, God.
But first, before I hand her the mic, I understand that you have been recognized with an award as a literary citizen. And I wonder if you just say
a citizen.
Exactly. Yeah. Can you say a few words about that?
I think actually, Melissa, you're one of the first people who, to me, like represented a citizen when we first started doing events inside of the DC Loyalty location. Melissa would show up with friends, professors, other writers, but also just with supporting. Yes, you would bring students in. It was just like showing what a book community is. And it's very scary when you start something because you're like, no one's going to show up. No one's going to come to this. No one's going to, I mean, you're hosting this every week and you're like, is it happening? And it is, because people crave real community. We don't have auto community in our society anymore. And so being a literary citizen is a difficult thing to weave when you're also running a business, because capitalism demands me over community, and we're trying to do the opposite while still keeping business going. So examples like Melissa, who show up to the store and bring people with them and say, like, spend time here, take a beat, take a minute. And then when we pivoted to digital in the pandemic, show up to those and talk in the comments. It means listening to the needs of the community before you and telling people that they are welcome when they are used to being told that they are not welcome. It's the first and foremost reason we exist, and people like Melissa are examples of that to me in real life. And you never know when you've been gone from someplace and you come back to your home to start something, if your home really wants the thing you think it does, and Melissa helped show me that it did. And then the Women's National Book Association recognized me this year, and that was a really incredible and honor. I thought they emailed me and they were like, we want to give you our Woman of the Year award, and I was like, oh, like you want me to present it to somebody else?
It's like, no, you're getting the award.
They were like, no, and I was like, I'm a bookseller, you know that, right? And they were like, yeah. Which they have given it to booksellers in history before, but their point, which I accepted the award, so I thank them regularly, but was that the community groundwork and the pivot that we did in the pandemic to make sure that the voices we cared about and the authors we cared about, either locally in our community or nationally, did not disappear or get swallowed by the pandemic. And we've done a lot of programming and fundraising over the last year as well, whether for literally raising money for food, because that has been a huge crisis, or raising money to help with anti-hate legislation, voting rights legislation, everything. Small businesses are often on the front lines of getting money for people. People don't realize that, but it's our community. We see these people walk past our store every day. We cannot leave them. So it was really, really honored by that award, but the full embrace of what a citizen means is taught to me by my customers every day.
Yeah. Melissa, let me come to you, because the reason that we have Hannah here today is that you chose loyalty as your beloved independent bookseller. Tell us what is so great about Loyalty Books.
Oh my God.
Hannah is what's so great about Loyalty Books, but everybody there knows the books. So when you walk in, it's incredibly, I mean, both storefronts are really warm places, but it's that people know the actual books. And when you say like, it's a red cover and it starts, there's like a B in the title, but I can't remember. They know exactly what book you're talking about, but also they know based on your taste, what other book you should be reading. But it's just a very, very welcoming environment. And that is something that I didn't know existed because I didn't know bookstores existed. I grew up on a rural dirt road without books in my house, had never been to a public library. And so when I walked into my first independent bookstore, I was probably 20. Had just moved to DC, and it was a huge surprise to me. I didn't know entire stores would exist just for books. And I grew up in a small family business, a pest control business that I write about in the Hive. And so I understood the hustle of a small business, understood what it takes for Hannah to succeed at it. But to find out that these things existed just for books to me was really mind-blowing and such a welcome surprise to find out that there were other people that really wanted to invest in a community the way that Hannah does. And it means something to have a community that is full of writers, but a community that like DC that is big enough that we can play on a national scale, of course, but also small enough that everybody knows each other. Yeah. And so, when Hannah and I talk about other bookstores, or I'm driving between the bookstores to sign stock, Hannah knows all the same booksellers that I know, and everybody is super supportive, that there's enough room for everybody. And also that you can just pop in. I'm going to show you a quick picture Hannah and I just took the other day. You can just pop in to the bookstore. Look at that. You can just pop into the bookstore, sign stock, see your friends, the booksellers like Hannah. That was the day, Hannah, you taught me what a smiles was.
Yeah.
Apparently where we wear our face masks because we are humans that care about other humans. And then you can but you have to smile really big with your eyes so that everyone knows, like, I love you. I love books. And they can somehow see that. So it's Hannah is the foundation of, I think, what it means in DC to have a community that's built around books. And whenever you go see Hannah, she has another recommendation for you. When I was in, 2 weeks ago, I was picking, this is the book she put in my hands 2 weeks ago. And I didn't even know this book existed. I thought I'd read everything by Jesmyn Ward. And I didn't know that she had a first novel that came out long before everything else. And then I shared it last week on Twitter and everybody was in the conversation. Beth Ann was in it. Celeste Ng was in it. We were all talking about what a fantastic first novel. And I wouldn't have even discovered it. And I thought I'd read everything. But Hannah knows better.
Yeah,
even authors with as much platform as Jesmyn Ward get pushed aside by the machine sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I want to talk about that with you in just a second. Because I think that's very interesting. I just want to remind our online audience that dropping questions or comments into the chat makes you eligible for a free giveaway of Melissa's latest novel, The Hive. And that if you want to pick up a copy of that novel, which you should, even if you already have one, you can have two, it doesn't matter. That the proper way to do it is through Loyalty Books. And we will be posting a link that you can do it through their bookshop in the chat. Melissa, a lot of the people who watch this show are themselves authors or aspiring authors. And so I just want to talk with you for a few moments about your book and about writing. And then, Hannah, I want to talk to you a little bit about the next thing, which is actually selling the books, and who gets recognized, who doesn't, what gets lost, what doesn't. Melissa, first of all, for people who don't know, will you give us the elevator pitch for The Hive and just tell us, give us another look at the cover and just tell us, for people who aren't familiar, what is this book about?
Thank you for asking. The Hive is a story about class in Middle America, and it's the story of four sisters who fight for secession in their family pest control business in a politically divided Midwestern town. So it stars the Feller family and their 4 daughters. The mother is an apocalyptic prepper, a doomsday prepper, and she's trying to save the family by getting ready for a natural disaster. And then the father, the patriarch, suddenly dies. And so the question of succession becomes among the 4 daughters. So sort of a book that I intended to begin conversations during our politically divided times when it's hard to have some of those conversations around the table with our own families. But you could talk about the Feller family and you can talk about the decisions and the disagreements. And they do a lot of family table discussions about timely issues like healthcare and how they're going to keep their business afloat. This is during the recession, 2008, but I think many of the conversations that they have are also about what happens to small businesses in a pandemic too. So it's, I hope, very relatable.
What was the timeline for writing this? When were you writing it? When was it sort of accepted for publication? How did that line up with the pandemic?
Happened in the middle of the pandemic. It was May 2020 when I, was it May 2020? What's today? I have no idea. Time and space doesn't matter anymore.
It doesn't matter. It's August 2021.
It doesn't exist.
It's August something.
Right.
I sold the book at the beginning of the pandemic. So everybody's shutting down. American universities sent us all home. Bookstores are closed.
Yep.
Everybody's pivoting online, trying to figure out how to do it. And I had sold this at the beginning of that, and it came out 1 year later. But I started writing it a few years ago when I went to a place called Prepper Camp, which is a survivalist place and a survivalist camp, 3-day wilderness camp in North Carolina. And I went there to try to understand the movement and what was really driving what I saw at the time is like resource hoarding. I wanted to understand what would make somebody in a community feel that they were so isolated from others that they couldn't rely on their community, because where Hannah and I live, the community really matters. And why do we see certain parts of our community and why do we ignore other parts of our community? So I had these big questions. And so I started writing the book then, did not know that we'd be headed into a pandemic where prepping skills would actually become very mainstream and not quite so extremist anymore. But it was useful when the book came out to have so many ways to talk about it. It always surprises me when you have a whole cast of characters and there's 5 different female point of views. When there's 5 women speaking, it always surprises me that there's so many different characters that people gravitate toward. There's something, somebody for everyone to relate to.
And there's more about Prepper Camp in the chat for people who are interested. As you say, I mean, that probably could not have been a more timely research experience. Tell me about being productive during the pandemic. I think that most writers have really struggled with, as we said, sort of the collapse of space and time, also just the intrusion of everything that intruded, the pandemic, political breakdowns. How have you put pen to paper?
Yeah, my students aren't writing a lot, and they ask me that all the time. They're panicked. And I keep telling them, you are surviving a pandemic. Like today is getting through today, making sure that you're healthy, making sure that your community's healthy, making sure that your family's healthy. That's really plenty right now. I think it might have some unrealistic expectations if we think we are producing, a lot of words, unless they're words that are just about surviving this experience. But having said that, I've written 2 different books during the pandemic, but both of them were stewing for a decade. And something about, a lot about getting a lot of time back. When I'm not commuting to DC, I've got 10 hours a week of my life back. And the days that I'm home, the kids were home, there's virtual school. It has sort of a predictability to the schedule that you don't have when there's all these other parts coming at you. And so I was able to block off some writing time that I had just basically found. But I think you just show up every day, whether it's pandemic or not. And sometimes the words are amazing and I think they're pretty good. And most of the time they are absolutely not. But you just show up every day and you wrestle with them, because what if you don't show up on the day when the words were really going to be good? So I think, I think there's a rhythm to it, but I do a lot of writing in my journal. I don't know when I'm not writing. So thinking of the pandemic to me, in that space assumes that I need to be at my desk, with my journal open or my keyboard on. And most of my writing happens when I'm on a walk in the woods with my dog. So I live right by Rock Creek Park. And so there's a lot of spaces to walk and write and sort things out.
I love that. That is very wise and compassionate writing advice. That's great. Thank you for that.
I mean, if we're not finding joy in it, if we're not enjoying it, I'm not sure that we should be doing it.
That's right. That's right.
You know, just because something's hard doesn't mean it's not worthy. But I don't. Self-flagellation is not my style. Like I get my coffee ready. I sit down with my journal, buy myself something new. Like I'm dating myself when I'm writing. Like who wants to show up, right?
Yes.
For someone who's just like, oh, Melissa, why don't you have 5,000 words? What is wrong with you? Why didn't you do that? That is not a person I want to write for. That voice in my head.
God, why weren't you my writing teacher? God, that's so great. Thank you.
You gotta set the scene. It's a date.
That's great. I love that. I love that.
I don't want to write for that voice that's super critical.
No.
I don't want to read the book that's written for that voice either.
That's right. You don't want to hear that voice.
Life is hard enough.
So Hannah, I mean, that's wonderful writing advice and perspective. So Hannah, you know, you have piles and piles of books behind you, boxes of books behind you.
They're all for show. She's just showing off.
I actually don't read books.
You don't read any of those books. Well, what I was going to say is that only a handful of those books are going to sell. And, you know, I would love to get a little bit of perspective from you. I mean, you were just saying, you know, like Jesmyn Ward's like debut, I guess, kind of fell off the radar screen. Like I also wasn't familiar with it when Melissa held it up. Yeah, I mean, like hold it up again, right? I mean, so, you know, I mean, I just, first of all, I don't know if you have any perspective on why and sort of, you know, why there are things that click and why there are things that don't and how that works and how much you as a bookseller can influence that. I mean, are you just riding the wave or do you actually have like volition in terms of steering this thing?
Why a Black woman from the rural South, small press book dealing with grief didn't sell 15 years ago, I think is fairly self-evident.
Yeah, well, that's fair.
And why it's being reissued now, also fairly self-evident.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not sure, I have lots of articles for you that you can read about why that might be the case. But I do think that, and clearly it doesn't have anything to do with the writing talent. So like, let's just like throw that out the window. Publishing is a machine. There are good parts about that and there are bad parts about that. But I am very, very much so a realist despite my love of aforementioned dragons. And so I think it's just important to acknowledge that and know that. And the machine is undergoing a lot of maintenance right now, and we're all very interested to see and invested in what it's going to come out to look like. But it's still going, like while we're trying to reframe things. At no point is this Rube Goldberg machine of publishing going to stop, reset, and start again. We're like working with an actively ongoing thing. Books take a long time to come out sometimes, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes you're like, they published that real fast. That was 2 minutes ago. And sometimes a book's been brewing for 10 years and Melissa happens to be ready to write it and have the space to get it down and then sells it in a pandemic and it comes out in a year, right? And in that year, not only is the book being edited, printed, bound, shipped, sales associates from those publishers are going out and talking to me, the bookseller, the Amazon buyer, the Target buyer, the Walmart buyer, the Barnes and Noble buyer, international sales associates are going out, right? Like there's so much going on aside from just like me sitting in my bookstore trying to ship books during a pandemic. And so I think knowing that we're part of a bigger machine is really helpful to your point about like, are you riding the wave or are you setting the tone? And the answer that is completely and utterly unique to independent bookselling is that both. I have to be aware at all times of what the wave is. And I will laugh because there will be times that stuff is at like the top of the New York bestseller list and I'm like, I don't even freaking know what that book is, because I have a mission-based bookstore that focuses, it's not entirely, there are bookstores, Black-owned bookstores, queer-owned bookstores, Asian-owned bookstores, disabled-owned bookstores that focus entirely on those subjects. I focus mostly on those subjects. I also focus on what I call like the full realm of diversity. We're talking financial diversity, we're talking disability, we're talking age. You know, we're trying to get full humanity in the store and focus on the people who are normally pushed to the margins. And so everyone just assumes when you say diversity, you mean like a Black face. And you're like, well, that's part of it. Absolutely. And obviously closest to my personal experience. But diversity is a big word. So, right now publishing likes that word to the extent that they have made it lose all meaning. And so it's my job to make sure that it is still imbibed with meaning, that every single book that they label diverse voices in the 30,000 title catalog I get every season from Simon & Schuster or HarperCollins or whoever is one of the bigger vendors / publishers, that there's still content in them that we care about. So right now, what I'm focused on as a store is aligning with the wave of publishing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's why I have the book. I'm a very, very big fan of Book Talk, of Bookstagram, Book Twitter. They're part of why I have a career. And so staying up on those things and having my staff stay up on those things, my booksellers show me things all the time I wouldn't have seen otherwise, giving them control, giving them access to publisher catalogs so they can recommend things for me, having them just tell me what they're reading. That's what makes a bookstore. The book community is also the booksellers. And so they're bringing stuff to my attention I wouldn't have heard of otherwise. And then it's also my job to make sure that, hey, these are like the things, the 10 books that publishing says are going to be a big deal this fall. And here's how you know, because they're sending those books to every Vulture and Lit Hub and New York Times and book blogger reviewer. So they're just going to be on the list. So we need to know about them. And here are the ones that we're going to stock because they align with our community. And here are the ones that like maybe we'll place some special orders for. And here are the ones we won't order because that person's a TERF and we're not going to sell their book. So, keeping them abreast of all that is part of my job. And on the flip side of that, I'm getting pitched all of those things. I'm picking what we're going to celebrate. And then on top of that, I'm hunting for who are my local authors in my community that I do or do not know about. Are they published only on Amazon and I can't sell them? Or is there another way that I can help them sell their book? Do they even know I'm here? We're only 2 years old in a physical space. A lot of people don't know we're here yet, but we're like famous on the internet. So that's a weird thing that happened because of the pandemic. So keeping up that outreach is still a very big project of the store. And on top of that, who's just someone that is investing in the literary community that we're a part of, and the DC and Silver Spring community part of, the immigrant community part of, the queer community we're a part of. So we're going to champion their works. We launched something in the pandemic called the Leap of Faith box, which is a quarterly subscription box. We pick a book a season. That's the book stacked behind me. Mm-hmm. And we say like, okay, we're worried that, even if there's a bit of buzz about this book or not, we want you to know that this is really good. Because just because there's buzz doesn't always mean the book is good, and just because there's not buzz doesn't mean the book's not good. And publishing, the other flip side of that, so we celebrate a debut, we push it, we love it, we love on it, we send out these subscription boxes, we host events for them. But the other thing that independent bookstore is focused on is 10 years later in the life of a book. I don't want your book to sell publication week only. I do. It's great. When it hits a list, it's great. It makes the publicist happy. It makes the editor happy. It makes the people doing the financial bankrolling of that publishing house happy. But will your book matter in 10 years? Will some reader find it and will it change their life? Will someone dealing with class issues? Will someone trying to have those hard conversations with their family? Will someone tell them that the Hive exists in 10 years? That's my job. I love a big debut, but it matters to me that in 10 years, someone can still walk in and someone at Loyalty knows that the Hive is ready, like to go, that they know that Jesmyn Ward had a first book that just got reissued, that they know that, our local reviewer / extraordinaire, Beth and Patrick, is, really excited about these 7 books, only 2 of which you would have heard of. That they know that Well Read Black Girl has local meetups, that they, all of these things about our book community, quote unquote big and quote unquote small, make up the store. And it's our job to kind of thread that needle.
That's fascinating. I love that perspective. One of the things that we talk about when we talk about, bookstores is community, and it's something you've mentioned a couple of times. And, I feel like the place where community intersects with the commercial aspect of writing and publishing that we're talking about is around book events. And I would just love to touch on that for just a second. Melissa, somebody in the audience had a question about whether you are going to be live anywhere or whether you are purely virtual on your Hive tour. Do you have any? I believe people can find out at your website, which we're going to put in the link. But do you want to just tell us a little bit about your tour?
It's been fantastic. It's been a surprise. I think that we talk a lot about what we've lost in the pandemic, but I feel like we've gained a lot. I mean, what Loyalty has done in creatively pivoting has been a joy to see, but also easy to be a part of. Like, you can just tune in every day and hear, Beth Ann will give book recs, and there's a new reading. There's so many ways to be a reader, and authors are readers first. So there's so many other ways to be part of those conversations. I've done mostly virtual events. And what has surprised me is, if I launch at Politics and Prose, 100 people might show up online, but hundreds of people will download and watch the video the next day.
Right.
That has been an audience that I may not have reached before. And that has been a big surprise. I had a in-person signing out at Bard's Alley, one of my favorite little wine and bookstores out in Vienna. And it was the most beautiful DC summer day. The sun came out, people were drinking wine, the patio was open, we were masked, people are vaccinated. It felt comfortable. And it was lovely to do an event in person. Most of my events are online, but I have one coming up, speaking of local community, on September 20th, and it's at Goodwood in DC.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know Goodwood, Hannah?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's just the coolest furniture retail shop.
We have a couple tables from Goodwood in the store.
It's just, Anna Cahoe is a writer who owns it with her husband, and really selects and she started selling a few books, her favorite books. She's working on a book too. I published her in Furious Gravity, which is a collection of DC women writers. And this is a community-based book. The cover art's done by an artist here in town, Marilee Mojica, who does work I absolutely love. And I bought work of hers a decade ago, stared at it on my wall for 10 years, and then realized that's my art now. Like, I own it, and I could call Marilee and say, can I use that for your cover? And we can make a book out of it. So I have an event. It's all community based also. Sandra Beasley and I, who's also a local DC poet, she wrote Made Explode, her new collection that just came out last spring. She and I are doing an event together September 20th at Goodwood. We're just taking over the store. It'll be after hours, and you can shop in the store, and you can hear Sandra and I read from our books. That one is in person, and I'm super excited.
Awesome. We're going to put the links to that in the chat for people who are interested. Hannah, your Loyalty has been super active in terms of online events. People can find out about it at the website. I understand that you're moving in the direction of doing live events in collaboration with a local record store and coffee shop. Is that correct? And can you tell us about that?
We have, right before the pandemic started, we started a partnership with, in downtown Silver Spring, a record and coffee shop called Bump and Grind. And they have a larger physical space than the bookstore. So when we do in-person events, we're scheduling some for the fall that are outside. Both downtown Silver Spring and our Petworth DC location are by farmers markets, which is very cool. And so we'll be doing some things in the fall in partnership with the farmers markets and kind of our local bid, and having some outdoor things happening, lots of story times. We've really missed hanging out with the littles. That's a big part of Loyalty, is our small friends. So we're very excited to bring those things back. And we're doing some larger venue events where we can really space people out. Some ticketed larger events for some author tours in the fall, where normally it might be like 1,000-person event, and now it's going to be like a 300-person event in a 1,000-person space, just so that everyone has space. Because like Melissa's saying, like, it's good when there's air. We know about COVID. So we're finding different ways to pivot to do community and in-person events. We will be doing some of those, but not a ton of them, probably until 2022.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the things about being in DC is that we're not a state, so we have a harder time setting our own boundaries. And what happens in Virginia and Maryland deeply affects us. It always affects you what your neighboring states are doing, but especially when you don't have the same level of rights that they have. So as, you know, vaccinations stall out, as those places are less strict about masks than DC is, you know, we're just keeping a really close eye on health, because ain't nobody dying on my staff to sell a book. Let's talk about priorities. That's not one. So we err on the
Absolutely.
side of being safe. But yeah, we had an event with the glorious and wonderful N.K. Jemisin on March 17th of 2020. Again, who gets help and who doesn't? Nora N.K. Jemisin has won the Hugo, I think, 1,000 times approximately. Is one of the greatest
every time she writes a book, basically.
writers of all time / our generation. Had never been given a book tour before.
Are you kidding?
Never been sent on book tour.
Is that
the city
true?
we became. Yep. She always did local events in New York and occasionally went out, but never had been sent by her publisher on a book tour.
That is stunning. I mean, that is really, really stunning. So
one of the things that we were all so excited to host her. We were going to do a literary cocktail hour. The great and good Chantal Singh, who does so many amazing literary cocktail hours and works with us here at Loyalty, as well as several other bookstores, as a sherry sommelier, that's a thing, and amazing cocktail artist, was going to do themed cocktails for the event. It was going to be great. And then we closed on March 12th. So 5 days before the event was going to happen. Obviously. And we worked with Orbit, her direct publisher, and she has an amazing publicist. She's one of the best publicists in the business, Ellen. And we were like, we have to figure out how this, but we can do this all the time. We just like, we're not going to not send this, like give this amazing author their time. We like had a Crowdcast account within like 3 days. And we just had to figure it out. And for me, security was extremely important because, again, I have a community that gets attacked online for a variety of reasons. So, which is why we didn't start with Zoom, because it just wasn't ready, and I didn't have time to learn security. So I needed a platform that was just auto secure. And we've been on Crowdcast ever since. We've done stuff on YouTube, Zoom. We can pivot, Instagram Live, everything, but that's our main platform. And then, again, it was authors and community members like Melissa who were like, we can do a thing. Like, let's figure out a thing. And we just, the theater kid in me was open to just being like, all right, let's try it. Like the desire to present perfection over the desire to actually be there and show up for your community is a struggle that I deal with every time. And I think bookstores deal with a lot. But you just need to be like, okay, let's try it. And so our biggest and greatest events we've done, whether it's, we did a series with Jamie Attenberg, Are You Getting Any Work Done? We do a monthly romance event called Date Night with Alyssa Cole. Doing in conversations, fundraisers, whatever, has just been us saying, yes, let's try it. And that's what people genuinely respond to.
Just a quick reminder to our audience that drop a question or comment into the chat, be eligible for a free giveaway of Melissa's newest book, The Hive, and go to loyaltybookstores.com to buy The Hive, to buy Flood. We've put in links to N.K. Jemisin's books at Loyalty in the chat, so go pick up some of those. We are starting to run down on time. I wanted to ask a question that'll be a jump ball for the two of you, whoever wants to take it on. But on the subject of events, Sharon in the chat and Christina in the chat are talking about how much they love virtual events, and they are cool, and they do allow us to see authors who we wouldn't otherwise see, especially for people who don't live in DC or don't live in Boston or don't live in one of these hubs. And I mean, there's a lot to be said about it, but I also really miss live events. Like in the before times, I loved going to live events. I'd love to just like show up at random events for authors I didn't know and just like see what happened and find out about it. I feel like book events at indie bookstores are oftentimes just like surprising or unique or quirky or funny or occasionally a little bit terrifying. And I don't know if either one of you has something that like leaps into your mind as like a pre-COVID live event that is just an especially good one to share with the audience for any of those reasons.
I also love virtual events. I love live events, and I'm excited to go back to them. But I do want us to think more creatively about, is this event accessible to all? Because if it's not, we shouldn't be doing them for anyone.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've certainly learned a great deal about during the pandemic. There was a bookstore in St. Petersburg called Book and Bottle that paired the Hive with a wine, an Italian wine that's made in this is one of my favorite events I've done, this book tour. It's a volcanic vineyard, and they paired it with the Hive because the Hive has the 4 Feller sisters, and the wineries ran by sisters. Cool. And I don't know, that was fun. I had never written a book that's when paired with wine before. I tasted the wine just purely for research and found it delicious and it made my book better. I'm not gonna lie, it made my book a little bit better.
So what you're recommending? Also, wait, what kind of wine was it? It was
white. It was white. That's how much.
It's like warm.
Summer. Yeah, it was done in St. Petersburg. It's Italian. So I was in. That was kind of a fun event. I won't lie.
That is great.
Yeah,
great.
The Hive is a warm book. Oh my gosh, so many. I mean, I ran. If you work at Politics and Prose, you run 1,000 events. It is like the event machine. Since starting Loyalty, we just did tons of wild things that I'm like, we pulled that off. Okay. Like I said, we did the literary cocktail nights, and those were incredible. And we always made sure to have mocktail options. We would do like in the before times, Bookies and Milk, where parents could go into the go have a drink, and then we would do story time with their kids and the happy hour time so that they could talk to other adults. That's an accessibility thing we talk about, being sensory issues, caption issues, literal physical mobility. But absolutely, the Metro is the store even accessible? We don't always talk about the fact that people either don't have traditional 9 to 5, so can't come to a 7 p.m. event, and also parents can't go to 13 book events and pay babysitters, and so that's been a really big thing too, to have people be able to come to events who have kids. So I've loved the pivot to digital for all sorts of reasons, and I think even when we do in person, we'll always have a digital option as well, or we'll record and post. I mean, it's not something we're going to walk away from. It's too huge a part of who we are, and it aligns perfectly with our values. But I will say, the wildest event the best thing that's ever happened that I've witnessed with my eyes is James McBride bringing his band to play when he was on his Good Lord Bird tour. And I don't think anything will ever. I don't know. Every time. I've seen John Lewis, pretty much every time Jason Reynolds opens his mouth, I'm both laughing and crying simultaneously. We've done some of our greatest virtual events with him in conversation. Maurice Carlos Ruffin and Casey Lemon in conversation was like going to church. It was preaching, it was hooting, it was hollering, it was great. We made t-shirts out of it. Every date night event, nobody throws a party like romance people. And I will end with the best event we had was actually the first time we hosted Alyssa Cole in person, and the power went out on in all of Petworth. It was just it was a blackout. It was a summertime DC classic blackout. And instead of freaking out or getting mad at us, as I've had many experiences happen with both customers and authors, everyone just went, huh. These romance ladies opened their bags. They were pulling out rosé out of their bags. I sent a couple of my booksellers up the street, and we bought a bunch of battery powered fans from Safeway and more rosé and watermelon, and burst open a watermelon in the store, and we put on a flashlight show, and we read sexy stories. We pulled books off the shelf. It was the greatest. And it was, again, an example of just let the community do their thing, and it's gonna work out, and you're gonna have a great time.
Yeah, what I'm getting from both of you is that wine is the key to the memorable event.
It can be, but a good natural disaster. I don't think we should dismiss a good natural disaster. When I was at Curious Iguana for my first book, Flood, and we had a flash flood, water coming out of the store. Yeah, the great part was all of the parking lots, the first floors of all the parking lots were flooded, so nobody could leave.
No one could go anywhere.
I guess we're here, and
Everybody better buy a book.
I was like, it's not safe to go anywhere. Everyone has to.
No, in fact, every time I walk into Curious Iguana, they always look at me like, "Oh, Melissa, what is the title of your next book?" Because if it's like,
did they have a bee infestation after the hive? Like, what's the story?
All right. Don't write a pandemic book.
Too late.
We're running out of time. Hannah, we usually go out on a question for the bookseller, which is a fill in the blank. And it goes like this. Successfully running an independent bookstore is part luck, part hard work, and part what else?
Tenacity.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah.
I love tenacity. I find tenacity to be joyous. I find it to be giving into the very stubborn part of myself. It has a direction that it can head in. But yeah, it's a tenacious undertaking because there's a lot of times where you're going to go, is this working? Is it successful? And you just have to go for it.
Yeah, a lot like writing a book to begin with. So that's wonderful. I love that answer. To our online audience, Leah is the winner of the free book giveaway of The Hive. So congratulations. And we will get that book to you. Thank you to Melissa and her publisher for donating that. It has been just complete joy to talk to the two of you today. Thank you so much for being here. Melissa, congratulations on The Hive.
Thank you.
Hannah,
it's really good. You should read it.
Hannah is doing her job and telling. And Hannah, congratulations on the Literary Citizenship Award.
Thank you.
And to the audience, buy a copy of The Hive. Also buy a copy of Flood. And don't do it just anywhere. Definitely do not do it from Amazon. Do it at Loyalty Books. The link is in the chat. Click on it. Go there. It's amazing.
We've got signed copies, so come by. If you're in town, come visit us.
There's a good chance Hannah is going to be the one that actually puts it in the mailer. And I've seen her do every single job in that store. Hannah does.
Yep.
And also sign up for the Leap of Faith box, for the Leap of Faith book box. Go to online events and hopefully some live events sometime in the future. Again, thank you both so much for being here. Complete pleasure to talk to you. To the online audience, thank you for joining us once again. We will be back next week. And until then, be well and keep reading. Thank you.